Hello and thank you for joining me as I paint this sunset landscape. This is an oil painting on canvas panel, and I prepared this panel with acrylic gesso and a little bit of orange acrylic paint mixed in with the gesso. Orange seemed like a logical choice since it's a sunset painting. Just sketching in the tree line here. Doesn't need to be exact. I just want it to look roughly like this. Actually going to end up obscuring most of this once I get the paint in, but having these marks in place show me where I need to do what. So this is the landscape that I'm painting. I'm painting from a photograph. Down here at the bottom, at the horizon line, we have orange, tons of blues in the sky, and then we have this tree line, which I'm essentially going to paint in black, but then there's some of those street lamps in there. I'm going to start at the horizon, and starting with a bright orange, and this is Azo Yellow and Naphthol Red. I just want to spread this color out as much as I possibly can. No impasto effect at all. And this color is going to gradually lighten to a yellow, and then to a light blue, and then to a dark blue at the top. I want this to be as spread out as possible, but also opaque. And I'm going to get it really, really smooth, and then I'm going to work all of the cloud shapes on top of that wet layer. And as I'm blending this out, I'm getting it smoother and smoother, lighter and lighter as I move up. Now I'm going to start working in the light blue. And that's just a lot of titanium white with a little bit of ultramarine blue in there. And I'm feeling right now that I'm starting a little high up in the painting with the blue. So I'm just going to take my palette knife and scrape some of that off. And this is one of the great advantages of working on a smooth panel, that if you get too much paint in a certain area, you can just wipe it off. So I'm using a palette knife for that, and then I'm just going to wipe that off with a tissue. I'm just going to start a little bit lower here. Same color, titanium white and ultramarine blue. And just blend that in, smooth it out. And then start in with that darker blue. And this is just same mixture with more ultramarine in it. I'm just getting more saturated with the blue as I move upward. Always blending, blending, blending. Now I'm getting in there with a highly saturated blue, and then I'm just going to work this all the way up. And this color isn't crucial because most of this is going to be covered by clouds, but I want a paint layer to work into, because this is a wet in wet painting. And I want a very thin, smooth layer of paint across the surface. And then everything I do in the sky from now on is going to be wet in wet. And then I've slowed this down to real time because I want you to see how fast I move my hand when I'm using a fan brush to smooth out any peak or valley that's in this wet paint. Just whip your hand across. This is not real time. I wish I could move my hand that fast. But sometimes when you're using the fan brush, you'll just be amazed at how fast you're whipping it across that surface, barely touching the surface. All right, now I'm going to start drawing in my cloud shapes. And I'm being very careful to measure as I go, make sure I'm putting everything in roughly the correct spot. But you can see how I hover the brush over the surface and move it in the shape of the lines that I want to make. And then it's just a matter of dipping your hand forward a little bit to make that mark on the surface. Now, as I paint this, I load my brush with a darker color than what I'm actually going to see on the surface, because as I paint, I mix. The paint I'm putting down now is mixing into the paint that's already on the surface. It's essentially the same consistency as that paint. And that's important, because if you apply the same consistency paint onto paint that's already on the surface, it's going to mix right in. If you want it to sit on top of the paint that's already there, it needs to be thicker, and that means less linseed oil in the paint. So it's drier, it's leaner, there's less fat in it. That's what I mean by a thicker paint. And also you want to load your brush up with it. There's a little too much paint right here, so I'm just going to scrape that away with a paint eraser. This is also called a color shaper. I think the one that I use is actually for clay modeling, but I've always really liked the way this works. And you can get some of that underpainting coming through. I'm going to use the same tool here to sketch in the body of the clouds on the left. And this is such a terrifically valuable tool, especially when you have this big smooth paint layer like I've got here. A little too much paint here, so I'm just going to wipe that away. But not all of it. So as I paint into here with the dark blue, there's still going to be a lot of mixing. And what I do is I just load my brush up with a very dark paint, and I make marks like that, and then you just blend them out into the surrounding area. And you get a sense of clouds emerging and disappearing. But like I said, anytime you want it to have that darker effect, and you really want to see the paint you're laying down, it's just got to have less medium in it, and you got to put more of it on your brush. And then when you want to blend like this, just push that same paint into the surface, and there'll be less paint on your brush as you go, and it'll just kind of slowly disappear as you continue to brush. And anytime you want to see those prominent dark areas again, just load the brush up again. going to put in some sunset blues here. Beautiful contrast with those oranges. And this is titanium white and phthalo blue. Get some sky colors up here. I'm just going to blend that out a little bit. Put in some little wispy clouds at the bottom. And then I want some of the underpainting to show through, so I'm just going to scratch away some paint with the end of my brush. Just removing paint from the surface, basically. And then I'm going to take a dry brush and blend that out. So you get a blended effect, but there's just a little bit less paint on the surface. And I'm going to use my paint eraser to just draw in some little wisps of cloud that are reflecting light. And now I'm going to move to my tree line. This is chromatic black. I can't really see those pencil lines anymore, so I'm just looking at the photograph. You've got a little shape down there where there's some light, so I'm just going to leave that unpainted. And as I paint the edges, I'm just kind of dabbing the surface lightly so that the individual bristles touch the surface of the painting in different places, and you get that sort of blotted brush stroke that gives the illusion of separate leaves. And I know I have to obscure the cloud line there, but I just want to make sure that I do it in the right way, in a way that looks good to the eye and is a close approximation to the photograph. I'm just barely touching the surface of the painting. And the paint that's already there it just grabs the paint right off of the brush. But I'm making sure that my brush is really well loaded with black. Right down in this area here, in the lower right, we've got some power line shapes, so I need to paint the poles and the nodes for that. There's another little node. And now I'm going to get a different brush. This is a script liner. And paint in the power line. I did add a little bit extra medium, a little extra linseed oil to this black because it's just, you can't really use a liner with thick opaque paint. And then I'm going to use the back of my brush to complete those power lines by scraping away. Scrape. Scrape. And scrape. And one more. All right, down here, There's a little clearing in those trees where you can see it's either a field or it's the street and a bunch of street lamps. I'm not thinking at all about the little details in there or the variation in color. I just want one mass color that I can throw in here. And this is raw umber, burnt sienna, and white. And then the edges of the trees will encroach in that. Now, there's street lamps in there, so I'm just going to scrape away a little bit of that paint with my paint eraser. And now I'm going to load up a brush with titanium white and paint the street lamps above the tree line. And then down here, there's a little bit of orange mixed in with the white. And then I'm not thrilled about this tree line, so I'm just going to do some corrections here. And again, I'm just loading that brush up with as much black as I can and just dabbing the surface with it. I'm just going to put in some finishing touches here, so I want to take a moment to thank you for watching this video. This is the Alla Prima painting technique. Alla Prima means all in one. And I think this is a good lesson in how Alla Prima can be thought of not as just one layer spread across the surface of the painting, but it can be done in layers. The thing is, those layers are just always wet. Here's a photograph of the finished product. I really like the way this sketch turned out, the contrast of the trees against the brilliant sky and the glittering street lamps at the bottom. Really pretty. I'm really happy with this. If you enjoyed the video and you felt like you learned something, then like it, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell to be notified about my next video. Thanks a lot. Bye.